And I will start by doing just a roll call to establish the quorum. Eleanor?
Yes.
And Heather?
Here.
And Tatiana Shannon? Yeah. Alan Bingham?
Yes, I'm here.
And Jahan Habib?
Here.
And Rose White?
Here.
Okay, great. Quorum established. And I will start by asking if there are any public comments, which would not include the presentations, right, Roberta? Those come later. Yeah.
Right.
Because we do have a lot of attendees.
I'm looking to see if there are any hands raised. My apologies to everyone in the public trying to learn how to use GoToMeeting. I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Then let's move on to approval of the September minutes, which were in the meeting packet. Anybody have comments, edits, suggested changes to be made to the September minutes?
I have a question. Under agenda item 2, number C, on the discussion of Junction Park, we had some talk about the procedure, and I think we were gonna, Roberta, you were gonna try to go back to the minutes to see if it was a discussion of whether or not we had that sort of preliminary vetting or not, and I think we had, because I think that was when we had sort of suggested to people to break things up into smaller projects when we had a lot of projects that year. So I don't know, it was just a thing to follow up on that item and make sure that we had clarity on that process.
Thank you.
So to not necessarily change that needs to be made, but Roberta, do you have any thoughts on the question raised?
So I recall this discussion in the previous meeting, and I need to go back and look at meetings in prior years, but ultimately we're not going to change what we've already done this funding round, but we're going to be looking at the application process kind of through a new lens before we begin the next funding round. So that's information that I definitely want to gather, how we've done it before, so that I can reflect on whether some things that I propose for the next funding round are new or are just refinement of the way you've already been doing things.
And maybe just changing the language in that paragraph to kind of reflect that it was more of a discussion and less fact. It sounds very factual, like this was blah, 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 blah. Whereas it's really a question of whether or not we had done it that way in the past before.
Okay.
I would just try to soften the language.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, edits, suggested edits for the minutes from September? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to suggest somebody make a motion to approve with this amendment, or as amended, with the amendment that Heather Highmark suggested.
I'm happy to make a motion to approve the minutes with Heather's suggestion.
Okay.
And I'll second that.
All right. I'll do a quick roll call then. Jahan? Okay. Yes?
Yes,
Eleanor?
sorry.
That's okay. Eleanor?
Yes.
And Alan?
Abstain.
Okay, and Arn is not a voting member at this point, yeah? Okay. All right. I think that's everybody, and motion passes. And so now we will move on to the presentation by the project applicants. And Roberta, I was just going to go through them in the order on the agenda. Maybe put that up on the screen for all to see, if you could.
Sure. Can you remind me which is the first?
The first one is Somerville Museum.
Okay. I'm opening the file right now.
Okay. And is somebody from the museum presenting?
Yes, let me, at the same time that I'm waiting for the file to open, advance Barbara and Allison from the museum.
Thank you.
And here we go. Are you able to see my screen right now?
Yeah.
So it shows the Somerville Museum?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good, okay. All right, so let me just see. I guess I'll just ask you to move from one slide to the next, Roberta, when I need to.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you could just
Um,
introduce yourself for the record, just for the recording, please.
Okay, so I am Barbara Mangum. I am the president of the Board of Trustees for the Somerville Museum and also an art conservator in my private practice. And I have applied on behalf of the Somerville Museum for funds, which we can look at in just a minute, about $157,000 to renovate the east bottom of the basement, the east basement of the museum. And that is an area that we will use for collection care and historic preservation, or preservation of historic objects is more accurate. So if I'm getting a little sign that says export PDF and stuff like that down the side of the slides, and I'm just wondering if that can be removed.
Yes. Hold on a moment.
It looks like you could just maybe hit that little arrow there. Yeah.
Yeah, that works.
Thank you
Sorry.
very much. That's much better. If you could go to the next slide.
Yep.
Or just, I know it's
Sorry, it
PDF.
doesn't work
So.
as, it doesn't work as
Yeah,
easily as I
it's
want.
not a PowerPoint, so you have to just scroll it down. Okay, so this is the name of the application. Access for All and More is the big capital campaign that the museum has had in some form or another for actually about a decade, but really it's become in the last year that we have gone all out trying to raise funds for accessibility. And this is collection care funding is part of that because we're trying to make the collections accessible to people and researchers and students, you know, everyone in Somerville who wants access to these collections. We need to get the collections in a situation that's much better than what they were in before we sent them out. And that is actually the part of this is that during construction of the elevator and the western side of the basement, we sent all the collections, about 3,000 objects or more, out of the building for their own safekeeping. And now, as we're getting to the end of the elevator access project on the east end of the basement, that's going to be done, we hope, by the end of the year. Then we're looking forward to bringing the collections back. But in talking with other conservators and environmental people who deal with the museum environments, we've kind of come to an agreement that we should not be bringing these collections back until the area is suitable for them. Otherwise, we just wind up having collections on top of collections and it's a big mess. So if you could go to the next slide, or I'll just call it a slide or a page.
So this is just showing you, pretty typical of what it looked like before we sent the collections out. You can see that, there were a lot of collections for one thing, and there still are. In fact, it took Gentle Giant about 10 days to get all the collections out, where they had actually thought it was going to take about 5. And these collections range from furniture, paper goods, documents, paintings, etc. So if you can, but all have a connection to the history of Somerville. That's what really is part of the mission in collecting. They have to meet that criteria. So this is the proposed basement plan that you see here to the east end of the basements, kind of central and east end. The area that you see that is kind of a slash mark, that is an area that used to be in part collections and now has been taken over in order to make the collection area safer. For instance, the lower area there where you've got the hand, that area had been included partially in the collection area, but it had a sump pump in it. So we took that out in order to protect the collections from the water, possible water damage from the sump pump. The area, which is now the multi-purpose room at the end, had also been collection storage. And now that has been turned into the multi-purpose area so that we can use it for a number of things. But for instance, for researchers who come to the museum and you want to basically get a piece from the collection and bring it into that room so that they can then have access to it. So it's a way of controlling, because one of the things about collection storage is that you want it to be secure. You don't want there to be theft, and you don't want there to be damage to the pieces while they're there. You want them to be in an environmentally stable climate, ideally around 50% relative humidity, and somewhere between, it can be pretty low temperature, but not more than like 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that is what we are trying to achieve. Those are the 21st century requirements of a museum. So if you go down again, another page, this is just looking at it again a little bit closer. You can keep going, unless you want to stay and look at that for a minute. This is showing you we've already gotten money for these kinds of storage furnitures for this new collection space. As you can see on the right, these are painting panels that you hang paintings on and then just are able to pull them out in a very controlled manner. And it's, much easier to see what you're doing. And then on the left, these are textile rolls for all the different textiles. We found in the process of moving these things out that we had 400 textiles we didn't even know about. So, it's wonderful on one hand because we've got a great collection now that we could look at. But again, imagine if you're a library and you were to take all the library books out of the library and then you brought them back and you did not have a librarian, you just brought them in. You can imagine that you would have made that whole collection pretty useless. So it's really critical that you have control, you can find things, you have finding aids, all of that kind of stuff. So that's part of this whole project. It's not what we're asking money for from you, but it's part of it. What we're asking really from CPA money is the bare bones of getting the east basement in waterproofed and ready for climate control and ready for this kind of furniture to come in. So if you could go one more. This is the budget. This is how we go from $157,000 for doing the basic construction to a project of $524,000 because of all of these other aspects to the side of it. 81,000 of that though is, in kind. Those are contributions from all our wonderful volunteers who will be helping with the project. And then the others are going to be costs that we still have to fundraise for, and we'll still be doing that. So the 157,000 is really critical to doing just the part that is construction. And that is the price that Stack gave us. Stack is the company that's doing the elevator right now. And so we have a really good working relationship with them, and they've been doing really excellent work. So we have a high level of confidence that they can do this job. You can go one more.
Okay, I'm going to have to sort of wrap it up quickly just because I have to leave time for everybody. Barbara?
Absolutely. So this is just budget detail. I don't expect you, to look at this in terms of figuring it all out, except again, it's just showing where all the money goes. And then next, these are just some of the collections. This is Mary Sawyer Tyler, a painting that we have. She's actually the Marietta Little Lamb. And this is just showing glass furniture, other kinds of things that we have. You can go to the next slide. And this is, you have to think of each piece of the collection as a window. That is a window into the past. And so we invite people in, and this is a program that we now have, and we're trying to do this every 2 years with the high school. It's called the Basement Project, and it was just wonderful. We are bringing these kids in this very unique program to be curators in the museum. And they go down into the collections, which is why it was called the Basement Project, not your usual basement junk, a title they came up with themselves. And this is Ada Santos kind of in the back there, in the second from the right. And she actually received an award for this project. The whole project received an American Association of State and Local History Award of Excellence. But these were 13 kids who put this together and came up with something extraordinary. And it was based on what they chose from our collection. So that's it. That's my presentation. I just want you to be excited about it as much as I am.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Questions from committee members for Barbara?
Yeah, so Barbara, you're asking for $157,352.
I am indeed.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, that's the amount that we got as an estimate from STAC.
And can you give us a timeline on this?
Yes, we're trying, we have to raise money, in order to do the whole shebang. But the nice thing about this amount from the CPC and the CPA funds is that this could be a standalone. And that means that we could do this as early as you were able to give us funds. That would be the first step of this whole project.
Yeah, because this is the first thing you have to do, isn't it? It's the first thing on
Yes,
the
that's right.
agenda.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it would be, we're kind of thinking June and July because that's when the museum is closed. We start closing down in June because we don't have climate control and it gets very hot in the museum right now. So we were thinking that would be a good time to start. So
Thank
they
you.
said it would take 8 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And then I guess I have a question. Once the space is renovated, how big is the space compared to what you need to put in there? Like you'll have this.
We're going,
Yeah.
well, that's one of the things that we are going to try to do by having a collection care person involved with this. The timing is, we're going to have to raise money for the collection care person. But the idea is actually that we would vet the collection before bringing it back so that we try to bring back only the pieces that we really feel are critical. I mean, we have a lot of pieces out there and they haven't been looked at since the 1980s in terms of real inventory. I mean, we've been doing an inventory and things like that, but there's so much more we could do in terms of really, getting curators in to look at them and tell us what are the important pieces to keep, what are the pieces that are not so critical. So we're hoping that that would be one way that we can fit them in the new space or the renovated space. The other thing is that we are also looking down the road at developing the attic because it turns out that the attic, especially now that we have that beautiful Palladian window up there, is quite a nice space and it's dry. So unlike the basement, our consultant has been very excited about looking in the future at the creating space for storage in the attic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Barbara, I just want to compliment you and the museum for putting together a really thorough application, and you really hit all of the items, and you lay out your program really well. So thank you so much for that. I have some questions about the Yawkey and the Cabot family grants. Are they already secured, and do they have a timeline by which you need to spend them, just in terms of
Yes.
how this whole
Yes.
thing comes together?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. Cabot is already secured. They've already actually sent us the money. We're supposed to spend that within a year, and that year will be up in June. So it's kind of fits right in there, like we'll be making it at the last minute, and otherwise we'll have to go back and just let them know that maybe we need another month or something. But it wouldn't be a long period of time, or maybe 2 months. But so that's great. And then the Yawkey, we just found out that the Yawkey was not really interested in doing capital in the way that we thought. And so that was kind of a blow to us. That's, 100,000. We were hoping that they were getting behind us. We still think that they will probably, I don't know. They'll tell us by January 1st whether or not we can even apply to them for anything. But there's IMLS, which I'll apply to in November. That's for 50,000, which is, you don't even have to match that. That's just as a small organization. I think we're in a very good position to get that 50,000, and we've got to keep fundraising. So that is the museum's goal, is to reach the 2.25 million, and we need about 185,000 to get there.
And I would assume that the CPA grant is sort of critical in leveraging to get other grants.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Rose, did you have a question?
I think it's mostly about the donations and how many of them were secured. So in terms of that overall pot, the 500 plus, assuming you had the CPA funds, would you be halfway there?
Well, like I say, if we got the CPA funds, that could be a standalone project. It's not the whole thing in terms of us being able to bring the collections back, but it would be the messy part in terms of construction and that kind of thing. And so, that, would just be fantastic. If we got the money, we would just do that part. I had hoped to go to Yawkey for the HVAC environmental control. Now I'm looking at IMLS. That if we got the IMLS, that would push things out to September. But I'm also really counting on the capital campaign to raise another 185,000, and that would be directly for this project. So I think we'll just continue to cobble it together until we get there. But we've been very successful. We got 70,000 from the vets. We got 100,000 from Demoulas. We got another 50,000 from Tufts. Those are our big ones. And we, of course, I'll make a little plea to all of you to contribute, become members or whatever. No, members won't help. That's operations. But anyway, every little bit helps. And we're just so thrilled that we're doing this. This was, this is a little historical kind of museum, art, cultural facility, and we never thought we'd be raising 2.25 billion.
So I just want to say for anybody else, any of the other applicants who are, online and listening, that the museum made it clear that the stipend for any personnel for the curator is not a part of the CPA grant, because the CPA funds cannot be used for that kind of stuff. So even though you've heard her talk about that during her presentation, that's not a part of what. Right. That's not a legitimate CPA expense. So that's being covered by other parts of her budget. So just to make sure that the public is clear.
Yeah.
Thank you. Rose, did you have a question?
I would just like to say thank you to the CPC for all of your support. You've been fantastic. Yeah, did you have a question?
I did. I just had one question about. It looks like we had approved this. We had approved funds for this use last year. Is that right?
Right.
But it was
pretty
repurposed.
similar, you know, I always have to keep changing it around slightly as things,
Yeah.
you know, move and progress. But yes, I mean, for collection care, I've been doing it twice, both in FY19 and also FY21.
Okay. And then my only other question is, and Alan, maybe I'm putting you on the spot here, but I'm just wondering if the Historic Commission, if there's anything in this Historic Commission's pot of funds that would be, or if this would be an eligible use. Maybe I'm not supposed to bring that up, but.
No, no, you are. That's an excellent question, because a lot of people suspect that the Historic Preservation Commission only looks after houses, but we don't. We look after boats as well, believe it or not, even though we don't have any boats. But we also look after artifacts. And you might recall that there was recently in the Somerville Central Library, we voted funds to restore some of the wood bas reliefs that are in the library. So we are interested in the historic preservation of the culture as well as the architecture of the city. So yes, this fits within the scope of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Shahan, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much. So I just have a question regarding the presentation. First of all, thank you so much for providing such great insights. You know, I understand that there's a pretty detailed budget, and also it has proposal quotes attached. Just wanted to get a better understanding of how comfortable / confident you might feel with respect to the proposals quotes, because during this pandemic period, we're seeing some costs increase and shift around, and I just wanted to get a better sense of what the project costs will be and whether there's any contingencies for that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think you know, the HVAC costs, which we're not actually asking for, but that's part of the project, you know, but that is something that was just developed by the engineer who's been doing this for a long time. Stack, I think, is very comfortable. You know, they're looking at having their guys do it, so they already got their guys, you know, the subcontractors to give them estimates on this cost. Like, so all the waterproofing costs and all that kind of thing, I think we're very confident on those numbers. I think one thing that we have to do is continue a little bit more design work, because, you know, they're providing us the shell. And then we have to figure out, okay, well, where is the storage furniture going? What is the access? We know that we want to keep, you know, some way of access for wheelchairs and things like that. So, you know, we have to still work that out. And so it's a work in progress. But I don't see, you know, we'll just be, like I say, we'll just be raising funds for that as we go so that we get it the way we want. My goal is to get those collections back as fast as we can.
Sure, thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Of course.
Sure. Arn, do you have something to ask?
Sure. I have a question, and you touched on it a little bit, but it was mostly just with regards to any sort of climate control system. So I thought I heard you say earlier in the presentation that you didn't have a climate control system in place, but you've also talked about having an HVAC system in. I wasn't quite sure what was happening with regards to, you know, how you were protecting, you know, the works, whether it be from air temperatures, humidity, dust, that sort of thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, we don't have any kind of climate control right now. And so what we do right now is, like, if we have an exhibition or something, we monitor, and we have little reporting hygrothermographs that we check and see what's happening to the collections. And then we ameliorate them. Like in the basement, we've been using 7 dehumidifiers to get the humidity down. And we've actually been able to do that, but then it brings the temperature up because of the engines, you know, the motors and all are contributing to temperature rise. And then on the first floor where we have exhibitions, we've been using like humidifiers, portable humidifiers, you know, during the winter. Our strategic plan is to, you know, first we'll go with, in terms of HVAC, work with this particular HVAC engineer to put climate control into the collection storage area. So it would be limited to collection storage. And we would do that. The idea is we do that before we bring the collections back. So everything's perfect. Again, future down the road, we want to get climate control in the whole museum. I think with global warming, it's really critical that we start moving in that direction because it is very hot there for 2 months of summer.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Sure.
All right, any other questions? All right, then. Next on the list here, Roberta, is Grace Baptist Church. Roberta, I think you're muted.
All right, thank you. Give me one moment to change over.
Sure.
I'm trying to see how to, okay. So I am dismissing Barbara and Allison as panelists, and I don't know if that will bump them out of the presentation altogether, but they can always come back. And I am elevating, looking to see if a representative from Grace Baptist Church, which is present. Please raise your hand if you are here to represent the Grace Baptist Church project, if you're an attendee. Thank you. And I will bring the project up. I believe I have it. And share. Can you see the slide now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but I'm showing the wrong one. I thought that I had Grace Baptist Church. So I'm going to unshare that.
Okay.
And and there we go. Sorry, this is going to take a moment to load.
While you're getting ready, I'll just say that as a co-chair, one of my duties tonight is to keep the clock. So we'll try to allow people 7 minutes total per group. So I will raise my hand or something when we're getting towards that time.
Okay. I think I'm ready to share. And all right, let's go. So have I believe that I've made Susan Hurst a panelist. Are you here?
I'm here. John Hicker should be doing the presentation. Do you have him in on this?
I do not see him present.
He had trouble getting in, so I forwarded him my link. So I don't know if he needs a specific link from you to get in, separate from mine.
Let me just check my email and see if I have an urgent message from him. I don't have a message from him by email or text. So unfortunately, I'm not sure that.
Well, I sent him my link. That is the problem. He has not gotten an actual invitation from you, and I believe that is the problem.
Okay. I don't know, perhaps then we want to move on to the next presentation while we give.
Okay, yeah, that makes some sense.
Yeah, if you could
That-
send him an invite, then I would suggest going on to the next presentation, and I will call him, and we will be in for the third one.
Okay.
So next on this list is Elizabeth Peabody House. Do we have a
Yes.
presenter?
Okay, so give me a moment again to switch over.
Sure.
I'm not going to keep complaining about GoToMeeting, but it's very inefficient to switch to make these. So Susan, if you get bumped out of to GoToMeeting, just use your registration link to come back in.
Okay, and John will have his own. I'll give him a call.
Okay. And so please raise your hand if you are attending and are representing Elizabeth Peabody House. Thank you. And I believe I have Elizabeth Peabody House open, but I must, yeah.
Okay.
All right. So can you see Elizabeth Peabody House presentation on my screen?
Not now. Mhm.
No?
No.
It was there a second
Okay.
ago. There you go.
Now can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. This is Katie from EPH.
There.
I feel
Great.
your pain, Roberta. I've been learning all of this myself, and it's hard sometimes, even after a long time of doing this.
All right.
I'll quickly introduce myself. My name's Katie Osella. This is my third year as the development associate at the Elizabeth Peabody House, and this is the third CPA funding cycle that I have gone through. And happy to be here in front of you all. So we are requesting funding for a design phase for securing our second floor space. Roberta, you can go to the second slide. So just a little bit about us. We are actually celebrating our 125th year in operation this year, which is very exciting. We have been in Somerville since the 50s and in our current location on Broadway since 1979. We offer a preschool, an after-school enrichment program, 2 summer programs now. We added one during COVID, and we also operate a food pantry, which in a couple of weeks will be.
Screen froze for me. Is everybody else?
Is everything okay?
What's that?
Are we all set?
Tatiana? Thank you.
Okay. As I was saying, our food pantry will be giving out 300 baskets of frozen turkeys and food to families in need in a couple weeks for Thanksgiving. So we have a lot going on in one location. The next slide. So our facility at 277 Broadway in Winter Hill, like I said, we moved to Somerville in the 50s. Now we live here. Originally, our building was the Broadway Methodist Church, which we've learned was built before 1882, even though the cornerstone says 1882. But the tower was added at a later date, and that's when they added the cornerstone. We have a preservation restriction on the building, and we, under the direction of our new executive, well, she's not new, this is her 4th year, but our executive director, Kretcher Roldan, we are really committed to renovating the facility and bringing things up to 21st century standards while also maintaining the character of our building, which it's a gorgeous facility, and I love being there every day. but it has, you know, it's old, so there's things that need to be renovated. So the next slide. So we have already received CPA funding for 3 separate projects. We have completely renovated our roof, which really extended the building's lifetime and has prevented a lot of further water damage. We then commissioned a comprehensive building assessment from the CPA, which helped us to assess our facilities thoroughly, which has really been our guiding light for all future renovations. And we also installed an addressable fire alarm system to allow faster access for the fire department. And all of these have been very generous grants that we are so happy to receive that we really couldn't have completed on our own at those times. Next. So this year we are requesting $30,000 to fund the design phase for securing our 2nd floor, which used to be the sanctuary of the church and was also a theater space, and which now can only support, it can support a reduced pounds per square footage, which we've learned through the consultation of a structural engineer. It currently supports 66 pounds per square foot, and the ideal is 100. If it hit 75, then we would just put a capacity limit sign outside of the entry, and we would be able to use the space again for its prior intended use as a large gathering space. Out of an abundance of caution, we have limited the use of this space to just small groups or nobody at all. During COVID, we have limited the space to storage. It is where we will be staging our Thanksgiving food distribution, but that will be a maximum of 10 people up there, and we're really trying to limit the usage of the floor just in case something were to happen. We have consulted with the engineering firm, well, the architectural firm Platt Anderson Freeman, who are the ones who completed our building assessment 2 years ago. And through them, we are also intending to work with McLeod Consulting, who are a structural engineering firm. And they are the ones that did the original assessment with the architects in 2019. And they're the ones who have determined the issues with our building and its structure. There's evidence that there might be structural issues in the basement as well of our facility, which is where our preschool is. And we originally were planning for this funding cycle, for this grant, to come to you all with construction plans for completing this renovation. But upon talking to our architects and talking with our board of directors, we realized we need to make this a multi-phased project because our building is old. We know just from working there that there are a lot of layers to it, and anytime we try to do any minimal construction or renovation, something else comes up. So we want to take our time and get as much information as we can before we actually cut into anything. We want to make sure our inspections are done properly. We want more structural reports than we received in the original building assessment plan. And we really want to assess what needs to be done and the best practices to make it happen, because we love this space. Everyone who comes into our building says, wow, that's a beautiful part of your building. What do you do up there? And we say nothing right now. It is our eventual goal, very long-term, to make this space licensable. We have come before the Historic Commission to talk about installing an elevator. I've been in front of the Historic Commission, I think 3 times in the past 6 months, talking about how to best secure this floor and the practices to go about it while keeping in mind the historic nature of our building. And we want to make sure that we're doing it properly because we want this space to last. We want our building to last, and we're really committed to making that happen. So we decided to make it a multi-phase project. So this funding would only cover the preliminary work before the construction happened. I don't know if I have a next slide. I do. Okay, yes. I just want to emphasize that while we have received CPA funding in the past, and which we're so thankful for, we also are committed to renovating the building in other ways with other funds, like these new stairs that are pictured here that we opened in 2019 right before COVID, which was unfortunate because they're beautiful and we want everyone to use them. So we've replaced our egress stairs, we've upgraded our food pantry kitchen. We were granted $205,000 from the Massachusetts EEOST Capital Fund this past June to cover our HVAC system and our boiling system and adding touchless appliances to our bathrooms, those are all COVID related measures, but that funding will really help us to upgrade the life of our building. We've already completed the HVAC renovation, and we will be reimbursing ourselves for that work. But we have done a lot to this building, and this is the next step. I think this is now the end. Yes. And I know I talk fast, so I apologize for that.
No, it's good. It's good because we get all the information that way. Thank you. Are there any questions from committee members for Katie?
I have a question. So the numbers of your request, the 30,
yes.
It moves around a little in the application. In some places it's like 9 and 9 for the architect and the structural, or an estimate of 15. Some places it's 20. So
right.
Can you, first of all, I think the committee has to figure out how, if there was an allowance in there, how that works. But is there like a hard number that you have really identified?
So the official quote that we've received from the architectural firm and the structural engineers together is about 15,000, but I read through their quotes and there are a lot of additional fees and services that we would have to fund based on what they find, based on additional hours if they need to consult with other experts. So there's a lot, we added a buffer into our request of additional fees that might come up. And as I said, knowing our building, there's always something else that comes up, and we want to make sure that we have the capacity to fund any sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, inspections that we have, anything that could possibly be included. But the hard number, the number we would like is 30,000. I believe that 20 is what the minimum would be to actually cover all the additional fees, and 30 is a just in case something goes horribly wrong number.
Okay.
If I may, I have a question, which is, obviously this is funding just for the design, the first phase, and I'm wondering if you all have put thought into identifying potential funders for the next phase as well.
We have a number of foundations that we've gotten funding from before that support capital operations, but we don't have anything laid down yet. We want to really see what kind of numbers we're working with before we start. We are actually, in honor of our 125th anniversary, we do have a 125th fund that we are currently raising, which will go directly towards building renovations and curriculum development for our program. So that funding will also be available, but it's not huge amounts. So we do have some options, but nothing set in stone yet.
Thank you. Other questions for Kay? Jahan, your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you so much for the presentation. My question is somewhat related. So I understand that this request, this application is for the design phase, and assuming that the design process goes well, takes about 1 to 2 months. I'm just curious to see or hear from you in terms of what are the next steps after that, just to get a clarification on what the progression of the projects will be. So if you could speak to that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are very lucky that the architectural firm has told us that they will be available for any consulting we need throughout the entirety of the project, including construction. So once we have their reports and the designs made, then we really want to make sure we find the right kind of contractor to do the construction. So we would probably go through about a month or two of seeking out contractors and talking to them and showing them the space to make sure that they're right. And then we would go right into construction. It depends on, again, this all depends on what they find in the design phase, but the scope of the construction itself, because we do have childcare programs. So closing them for any amount of time is a loss to us financially, and it's a loss to the students and their families. So we've gotten very good at planning things on weekends and stuff, but we know that this will take longer than that. So we would have to plan around that as well and try to find a time that would disrupt our services as little as possible. I don't know if that answers your question, but it does all depend on what the scope of the work ends up being.
It does, and I was looking for more on the intentions and the plans, and of course things can happen depending on the results of the reports and so forth. So I really appreciate it, and also thank you, Madam Chair, as well.
I guess to add to that, sorry, our intention is that once this design phase is completed, we will have the plans to give to a contractor to do the construction. That's
Understood.
our goal in this phase. Yeah.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Alan, see your hand?
Yeah, thank you. Katie, can I ask you, the cost you've got down here is 14,240, yet you're asking for more than twice that amount as a sort of a fudge factor. That seems a little bit high for me. What makes you think that it's going to be $30,000 instead of what they've actually quoted at 14,240? I realize that there's normally a fudge factor, but typically those sort of contingencies don't run 100%.
Well, our executive director is a big proponent of making sure that we have a right amount of buffer, and then we go a little bit higher because we know that there's so much in there. For example, in that floor of the building, there's the original facade of the building, which was covered by the tower, is also a factor in that floor. There's a lot going on in that space, and some of the buffer is to cover the fees and services that are kind of hinted at in the quote that we've received. So we know that it would be higher than the 14,000. And then the additional is just to make us feel comfortable. But like I said before, 20,000 would be our ideal, and 30,000 is, we hope.
Okay, just for the sake of the group, this is something that the integrity of the building is something that we're looking at here, and this is something that historic preservation is particularly interested in, because typically we don't get involved in historic preservation in things that are internally to the building unless they concern the integrity or something that can't be reversed. Where we look at the structural integrity, and I think this is the integrity, and also the intended use. The intended use initially was that this would be a meeting space, and so the carrying load of the floor is something that's important. And from our perspective, after reviewing this, we felt that this is a very worthwhile project to investigate, to try and bring the building up to a long-standing usability for what it was really meant to be. Even though the Commission does not fund churches, this is the Elizabeth Peabody House, which is not really a church. It just happens to be an old church building. So it qualifies. Thank you. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Alan. I know that you've heard a lot from me in the past year with this, so thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question more for the committee in terms of what we can, like, when we give awards, does it have to be for the exact amount that the application is for? Can we give it for less and advise them to come from the discretionary fund? Like, what are our options in an application where there's a huge contingency applied to it?
Roberta, you want to take that one?
Sure. So typically, so the committee can recommend a lower amount of funding or a higher amount of funding than what's been requested. But it would be prudent to provide as much funding as the project is going to need in the end, because if they have to come back and ask for more money, then that has to go through the CPC recommendation and then through the city council again. So it's actually much simpler administratively and for the applicant and for the committee if you approve more funds than are needed now, and then any unused funds will get returned back to the reserve, which is a simple administrative task. So to the extent that the funds are available for the funding round, that's another question. But it's simpler for everyone to overestimate and return money than to underestimate and then have to come back and ask for more.
Thank you for that. Alan?
Yeah, I just like to add to that, because we're dealing with architects and engineers, professional people, I think tend to have a very high ethical standard. And I believe that because of that, we have a greater degree of trust that they will not bloat the thing out to $30,000. Whereas if this was an ordinary contractor of dubious notoriety, then perhaps they would be inclined to say, well, it's going to cost $30,000. So I feel somewhat confident in sharing with the committee that because it's two professional organizations, that we could be confident that there probably will be a refund and not all this money will be used.
Rose?
I just was going to actually go the other direction and say, I think that I would guess that these guys I agree with you, Alan, that these guys will be right on their projected dollar amount, but that in order to get a full evaluation and do all of the due diligence necessary to figure out what the full renovation project is going to involve, that there are going to be additional is there an environmental assessment that has to get done? Is that, just so beyond those two, are there some additional studies? And so that's, I guess, a question to the committee is, can this up to number cover things that aren't identified, as long as it's as long as we're saying as it's necessary for the full assessment of a larger project?
Yeah, Alan?
I can possibly help you with that as the delegate from the Historic Preservation Commission and a historic home owner who has spent a lot of money on a money pit of a house, that I can assure you that as soon as you open a wall to look at something, you're going to find something that you didn't expect. So there are always surprises. The extent of those surprises is what I'm questioning.
I know we have a lot of surprises. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
Okay.
I think we might be, I forgot to start my timer when we got rolling on this, so we might be at time, but I just want to correct one thing that Roberta, last year we had thought about giving extra funds to one of the applicants, and we could not, because we could not exceed the amount that they asked for, and that went through the city lawyer. So
Sorry, Tatiana here. I just got in, internet connection's been terrible, but isn't emergency funding an option? I know logistically it's a lot more complicated, but if I understood the application correctly, 14 something is what it should cost, 30 something is what it might cost. Is there like a midpoint we can give them so they've got a cushion, and then God forbid they need more, do emergency funding? I realize it's a bit of a, anyway.
Roberta, you want to speak to that?
Sure. I think it's up to, I mean, it is, you can reduce the amount of funding that's been requested, and it would be to the committee's discretion to accept an emergency off-cycle application. So that is an approach that you would have the option to take.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions on this one? Okay. If not, do we have somebody from Grace Baptist Church ready to present on that application? Oh, Roberta, you're muted.
Yes, I see that they are here, and I will just take a moment to do the changeover if you bear with me.
Sure. And thank you, Katie, for the presentation.
And I will find the correct presentation in a moment. Here we are. Can you see the presentation?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, and John Hecker is here, I believe. Are you ready, John? He's a panelist and he is muted. Requested, there you go. Are you ready, John?
I am. Yes, I am.
Okay.
I apologize for the mix-up. It wasn't clear to me exactly how to do this. Susan Hurst is my colleague on this project. She's an architect. We work together. We've worked together on the previous phases of this project. And first off, I want to thank Alan for his very flattering view of architects. I appreciate that very much. I wanted to also say that our business model is that we work with a lot of nonprofits, and so we basically do a lot of our work on specification and trying to get our clients grants. So what you see here is basically what we do the design kind of upfront. We help our clients get a grant, hopefully, and then we proceed with helping them accomplish the work. So what I'd like to focus on tonight is really how this building is used. It really is, it's a large building, but it's used to service the needs of the people of East Somerville. It has three main social service components. It has a food pantry on the lower level, it has a daycare on the main level, and it has a kind of a sheltered housing area on the upper level for women and small children. And I'd like to focus on accessibility. What Susan and I have prepared for tonight are photos that, oh, I'm going to start my clock here. I'm giving myself 7 minutes, so I just started it, and I'll watch that time. The photos at the bottom of the page are arranged along the north side of the exterior, and they show the approach from the north side of the building, which is the primary approach to the building. The photos at the top are along along the north side of the building. The ones at the bottom are along the south side of the building, and the ones on the right-hand side show the front. Now, the current problem is that we have all three functions using the south side of the building. And as you can see from the photos, if you walk across the bottom, you see a ramp. You see the second photo from the left is the stairs to the daycare. The third photo is the stairs that get you to the daycare, that get you to the homeless shelter, which is in that at that doorway at the end of the arched opening. The fourth photograph from the left shows the approach from the sidewalk. You see the stairs and then the ramp and then the homeless shelter. It's always interesting to go and visit this building on Tuesday because that's when the food trucks come and deliver the food to be stored for distribution. It's also the distribution day for food. So imagine women pushing strollers and then lifting them up the stairs to get to the daycare, dropping leaving their strollers outside, then having to walk up another set of stairs to get into the daycare. If you're a woman with children and you're trying to get into the shelter, you have to walk up the sidewalk, up the stairs, up the slope ramp, through the doors, and then there's an internal stairway. So the accessibility here is very difficult, and that's why we're focusing on that. The driveway is too steep. It's composed of cobblestones. The sidewalk approach to the main stairs is too steep. We're facing an imminent problem that this is a building that is open to the public and it has no accessibility. There's really no access to it. People who have accessibility issues are driven up the driveway, they're dropped off, and then they're pushed up that slope, none of which is in accordance with the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board. So what we're trying to do is have a plan that it can be done in phases to provide accessibility. So these are the exterior stairs. Roberta, if you could please go to the next slide. Okay. Yes. That one's fine. That one's fine. So these are the internal stairs. If you're a woman with small child, and you can see the red numbers kind of in the middle of the plan along the bottom. Yes, thank you. So if you've come from the street or from the sidewalk, you've walked up the stairs, walked through the arch, gone up the slope, entered the door, then you have to negotiate these stairs to get up. So if you have a baby cart or a stroller or a bassinet or whatever, you have to negotiate those stairs. Could we have the next slide, please? Now we're in the inside of the building, and the stairs that are shown at the bottom of the page, at the bottom left, show what happens when you enter the service entrance, which is where the food trucks come to bring food to stock the food pantry. And if you look on the right-hand side of the page, the middle photograph that has the steps going down with the green door, that's the entrance to the lower level. Yes, thank you, Roberta. And then if you go straight down below that, there's a picture that shows the same stair from the inside looking back. Yes, thank you, that's it. So there are stairs everywhere. It's a very, very difficult building to get into. So what we have worked on very hard here, and Roberta, if we could jump to the last two slides, please. One shows a north elevation. I just delivered a hard copy of this to the Historic Preservation Commission this afternoon because they had asked for some north elevations to show before and after. And conceptually, it's a little hard to get your arms around this. And I think this diagram will help. The cross street is on the left, then the sidewalk, and then I've showed the current existing sidewalk in a red line that slopes up, and then you go downstairs and then you go through a door. And the interesting thing is that I remember when I measured this using a level, it turns out that the sidewalk elevation is almost identical to the floor elevation of the kitchen, which you see on the bottom left, and then the stage is the same elevation as well. So in effect, we have to, if we're going to make this building accessible, and I think this is a relatively simple, straightforward strategy, we pretty much demolish the existing sidewalk and then we cut going straight back, and we'll have almost a perfectly flat access sidewalk that would go in and enter the building at a floor level in the social hall that would be raised up about 1.5 feet. So then the kitchen, the social hall in the middle, and the stage would all be at the same level and would match up with the sidewalk level very, very closely. So that's the concept. Roberta, if you could go back maybe just one slide. one more down to slide number 4, that one. Okay, so this is what we have currently. This is the existing arrangement. And so the dotted line on the bottom shows the kitchen. If you had X-ray vision looking through the wall, the kitchen elevation is shown dashed. Then the depressed floor is the social hall. It's down about 1.5 feet. Then the stage steps up. So what we're doing in, actually, if we could go to slide 3, Roberta, that would be terrific. Okay, so now we're in that space. And if you look at the upper left-hand corner, those are the stairs coming down from the existing entry. And you can see, I think there's 5 or 6 risers. And then the stair shows up again in the photo right to the right. And then on the other photo to the right, you see it there. And the you can kind of see the stage level in that third photograph that was that Roberta had her mouse on. But we would be infilling that, yes, we would be infilling that floor space. I just hit my timer. I'm gonna stop it. We have a photo of the kitchen, which is, if you go to the bottom of the page, the second photo from the right. Yes, thank you. You can see the 3 steps up into the kitchen. So where Roberta has her mouse right now, the social hall is down about 1.5 feet. So we would be infilling that floor, and we'd have plenty of headroom, but we'd have one area that would all be one elevation, and we'd have a much simpler approach from the sidewalk. People could come in to pick up their groceries. They wouldn't be tripping over people who are delivering the groceries at the other side of the building. We have a spot picked out for an elevator in the future, and this is kind of the concept.
We're at time.
Yes, I've used up my 7 minutes, but that is the concept. And then in terms of costs, in terms of how we've arranged the costs, we've developed some priorities here, and the sidewalk is a very high priority. Moving the door, and I know the Historic Preservation Commission had an issue with the door. The door has been previously widened and lowered at some time in the past, so it doesn't have a lot of historic integrity. But we would, to satisfy their requirements, we would take that door frame, that door, and lower it to try and reuse it. So our focus, our request is for the sidewalk improvements, the demolition and a new sidewalk, relocating the door, and then we get into some other things. We get into some potential window work, possibly putting, if we're going to raise the floor in the middle, this would be the perfect time to pour the foundation for the future elevator. And so that's also on the list. So we have given you kind of a shopping list of items, but the focus here is on accessibility, and the building, Hispanic, Somerville Hispanic Association for Community Development, they're going to be facing this issue with the Mass Architectural Access Board that the building has to be made accessible. And so this is our plan to make the building accessible, possibly in phases, but conceptually we've looked at it in its entirety.
Okay, we are at time, so I think we should open it up for questions, because you'll probably get the questions on the exact things you're touching on now.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yeah. Are there any questions? John? Yeah, Ellen?
Yeah, the applicant did come before the Historic Preservation Commission, and we all thought that lowering the walkway would be a very good solution to this. I do have a question as to the impact that this might have on the foundation of the building, which I'd like him to address. That's point one. I think the other thing is that the new door and frame, we would like the applicant to come back before the Historic Preservation Commission to show details of exactly what that door and frame is going to look like for approval.
We would be reusing it, Alan. We've changed that. And
oh, yeah, okay. You're going to reuse the same door.
We are. Yeah, we responded to the preservation planning comments, and I dropped off a package today, which you haven't unfortunately haven't had an option to see, but we have agreed to reuse what's there and try and modify it.
Okay. But if you do have to replace it, you'll need to come back before the Historic Preservation Commission. The other thing that was concerning us, well, two other things were concerning us, was to item 6 on your list is to provide a 12-inch thick slab. No, sorry, item 7, to put down a concrete floor over the foam and gravel. And we were wondering why, when people build floors, they typically build a wooden floor. And you're suggesting that something here would be a masonry floor. One of the things that we look at always is, can this be removed if necessary, because this is a historic structure? And we were concerned about the cost as well. We're looking at this at $135,000. And it was our sense that a wooden floor might be more appropriate, and that it might even end up being a lesser cost. And yet that hasn't been quoted. And in concert with that is that typically when we wrote the guidelines for historic preservation for Community Preservation Act, we like to see 3 quotations, and you've provided 1. So perhaps you could answer those questions. They're the ones I have immediately. It might be more.
None of the floors at the lower level are wood floors. The stage is concrete, the kitchen is concrete, the social hall floor is concrete. There are no wood floors.
Okay, so you disqualified a wooden floor because you thought that the others were concrete and that wood would not be appropriate.
It's putting a wood floor down, I think, would be actually more expensive. We're trying to fill up that space using the 12 inches of the geo foam. Instead of using more expensive crushed stone or more concrete. This is a product that we've used in the past where we have to fill in a floor and do it in a very cost-effective manner. And for what they do in the basement with the food preparation, the food distribution, a wood floor isn't going to be as durable, as cleanable as a concrete slab. There's a lot of food being prepared down there, used and distributed. It's just the concrete is just a much more durable product.
Rose?
John, it's a great, really thorough proposal, so thank you for that. My one question is just about the phasing of the work. Is the phasing, I'm curious just to know, is the phasing purely funding driven, or is it, are there other reasons for the phasing? And I apologize if you said something about it and it didn't register.
This is a nonprofit client, and they're totally reliant on getting grants. So we've helped them get previous grants from CPA as well as the Mass Historical Commission. So we're always trying to break projects down into smaller items so we can chip away at things. We've had this accessibility proposal in before. I think this might be the 3rd time it's been in for the proposal. So just as an example, in terms of the Mass Architectural Access Board, they like to see a concept for how you're going to achieve full accessibility. So they're very willing to talk to nonprofits in particular about maybe a 5-year plan. How are you gonna start? And so they want to see what the total plan is, and they're willing to bend their rigid rules and issue variances if your ramp has to be a little steeper or if the platforms are not quite the full length. We were able to do that on the Vilna Shul on Beacon Hill. They're very amenable to try and help you gain access to buildings open to the public. So we have a very good relationship with them. We try and work with them closely, and we try and keep them in the loop. So we are trying to make a first step toward accessibility. This would be the first step, because right now there really is no accessibility to the building.
Okay, so it really is just it's funding limitation is the reason that the work gets spaced out.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Yeah, Heather, and then Alan.
So one of the accessible walk and the wall that's required is sort of the big chunk of the ask. Can you tell me a little bit more about this wall and also address sort of what happens to the door that has the stairs that are now coming down to the walkway, which will then be depressed at the basement level? And Alan's question just about by exposing that much of the basement level, what does that open up for that lower level of the building in terms of it being protected or secure or safe?
Right, because the foundation, part of the foundation will be exposed, and where the cutting occurs, there's a certain amount of grading that happens, and then there's a certain amount of retaining walls that go in place. And so we have come up with a concept plan. We hired a landscape architect to figure out the slopes and the stairs to provide access to the other stairs. So we've kind of gone way beyond in terms of providing design services. I don't want to say for free, but we have not been paid for any of that work. So we've tried to plan as best we can, but to be honest with you, if the project were funded, then we would have to deal with some of those things as the project progressed. And before we started digging, we would probably do some exploration holes to confirm the composition of that foundation wall. We probably have to, it could be that we'd have to work with a structural engineer, maybe to cast something up against, like a concrete wall, to maybe just to protect that rubble stone wall, if that's probably what it is. So some of those details would have to be worked out and finessed. But what we have right now is more of a concept plan, and we haven't gotten into doing detailed wall sections. It's just, we are not being paid for that at all. So we are trying to help our client get funding to do the first accessibility phase, and we've prepared a concept to explain it.
So the 150, does it have room in there for all of these unknowns that haven't yet been explored?
It's a very difficult climate right now for construction. It's extremely challenging. We have been waiting for building permits for the city of Boston for 4 and 5 months for very simple projects. And it's just very, very demanding. HVAC equipment, there's a huge backlog. Contractors are swamped. There's a labor shortage. It's we can't even get our MEP consultants to quote prices on mechanical and electrical equipment because the price goes up 8 to 10% per week. So some of our church clients who are investigating major redos or investments in systems, some churches are being asked to pre-order equipment for delivery in 6 months. They pay for it all up front because the prices are not guaranteed. It's a very strange market. You've probably noticed going into stores that certain things just aren't there.
So does that, I'm going to interpret from that answer that means the 150 does not cover the installation of the stairs and any kind of contingency or unknown about what you're going to actually get into when you start excavating.
It's our cost estimate from Synaxo, who's a general contractor who has worked on the building on a number of phases. They're pretty familiar with it. So I'm sure there's a bit of wiggle room in there. And once you get into construction, there's a little bit of, to be realistic about it, there's a little bit of horse trading as you discover things. As some of your previous applicants have mentioned, you open up a wall, you open up a floor. there are things that you didn't expect. So it's a process that's not always clearly linear or can be described or can be anticipated. So we try and anticipate as much as we can, but it's one of those things that it develops as you go through the construction process. Alan's point about the foundation is a very good point. Yes, that is something that would definitely have to be considered. We don't want to undermine a foundation. We have to consider drainage. We have to consider grading. Retaining walls are expensive. So I wouldn't say that what we've drawn is cast in stone. We've tried to make it kind of all inclusive. We've given it our best shot. And I think our initial price for the sidewalk work was $75,000 a year or two ago. Now we've almost doubled that after Synaxo has taken another look at it. Laura, you're muted, I think.
Alan, did you have a question?
Actually, it was about the integrity of the foundation, and both Heather and the applicant have, I think, addressed that.
Okay. Any other questions for John on the First Baptist Church?
It's a very challenging project, but I think for what for the clientele that the building serves, if you ever have a chance to go there on a Tuesday morning, just watch the food being unloaded from the trucks, watch the people coming to get it, and watch them tripping over each other and trying to get baby carriages up the sidewalk, up the stairs. It's a challenging building, but they have the best interest of the community at heart. They need help from a design sense and a funding sense.
All right. Thank you, John, for the presentation. I'm gonna suggest we move on to hear about the Land Acquisition Fund application now.
I will take a moment to make a changeover. And all right.
Hi, everybody. How's everybody tonight? I have 3 presentations tonight. As an introduction for people who either on the committee or in the audience who don't know me, my name is Arn Franz, and I'm a project manager with the Department of Public Space and Urban Forestry. Our department is responsible for much of the open space in the city in terms of how it's developed, and obviously with the interest of the city, at heart. We're always striving to provide the greatest number of community benefits, as we go forward. In any case, we're talking, this request is for the Land Acquisition Fund, and I apologize that on the opening slide I have a date as April 27th. The date is October 27th. That was something that didn't get saved when we put the presentation together. So this is a pretty straightforward application. We are asking for $250,000 for the seed, the Land Acquisition Fund. So in the past, let's go to the next slide. And the next one. So we know that in general, across the board, we were just talking about the costs, the unknown costs, and the cost of construction and materials and delivery costs, and the cost of land all skyrocketed in the last few years. Everybody's seen that increase. And the CPA has put money towards the Land Acquisition Fund in previous years, or previous requests have been smaller. But as we see the costs of land increasing, we are putting in a more substantial request this year. So that's why you're seeing the higher number of $250,000. I think that both the members of the CPC, city council, people in the community have talked about the value of open space in the city and its vital function. We want to make sure that the spaces we have are available and accessible to everyone. We are an urban community, so each square foot that we can set aside is incredibly valuable. We're not a suburban community like Lexington or something like that that has seemingly endless amounts of open space. So the city has a goal of continuing to try to acquire more open space, as we go forward. And we have made, incremental, we've had incremental successes. And so I think that having the land acquisition fund is probably one of the best tools that we can have. So most of the information here is information that I took directly from our application. I just wanted to, reiterate that this is the idea of setting aside funding for land acquisition. The need for it is something that both the CPC, City Council, and the community have mentioned, any number of times. Go to the next slide. This is an article that I just that I downloaded. This is an article from 2019. It was in the Somerville Times. There's a couple of interesting points here. It talks about, in the first paragraph, it says that the City Council and Planning Board meet regularly to discuss the need for increasing open space. The city is more broadly looking at the future of open space. That's just, additional validation. One of the interesting things is this is an article from 2019. And if you look at I didn't include the whole article here, but if you look at the last paragraph, one of the things that it says is that the number that we came up with at the time that this article was written is we were calculated that it's about $6.2 million an acre to develop an open space in the city. It's a purchase of the land, the design and the construction. So that's clearly a lot of money. So the more money that we can set aside to the land acquisition fund, the better off we are. As we said in other times, we take these funds and we can leverage the CPC funds to get additional funds as well, whether it's grants or city bonding. Next slide. So the City Council with the CPC established a land acquisition fund in 2019. This was seed money so that open space could be acquired. Let me just read through this. Critical opportunities to acquire new open space sometimes present themselves as initiatives from the public, from city staff, and having access to funding source, as I just said, may not be enough for any particular acquisition, but having a pot of money to go to leverage additional funds is going to make a significant difference. And as frequently stated, there's a critical shortage of open space in the city. May not everybody's repeated this, the fact that Somerville is the city in New England that has the least amount of open space per capita. So we can create opportunities for new open space. We see that as an essential need for all. Next slide. I took this from just as an example of cost. This is just sort of amusing. This is a real estate listing from 2 days ago. Just looking at the price of housing in the city. So there is that factor as a CPC considered housing issues. But look at these numbers. This is crazy. Just like if you're trying to buy a property in Somerville with the idea of developing it into something, it's just it takes there's nothing that's inexpensive these days. I mean, when you see, you look down at the second row and over to the right, there's 2 condos in this building. There's one condo selling for, $1,150,000, another condo selling for $2,450,000. It's remarkable how how expensive things are these days. And so I just thought this was an interesting way to think about it. Next slide. When we have community meetings, whether it's for a public space, a park, or a schoolyard, one of the things we come back to is the attributes of open space. So, it's all well and good to say, yes, it'd be nice to have more open space, for whatever reason. But the fact is that there are well-researched, and critical values to open space in the city. So, modern life is associated with chronic stress, insufficient physical activity, exposure to anthropogenic environmental hazards, urban green spaces such as parks. This was taken from an article, I'm sorry I didn't cite the source. Urban green spaces such as parks, playgrounds, and residential greenery can provide mental and physical health and reduce morbidity and mortality in urban residents by providing psychological relaxation and stress alleviation, stimulating social cohesion, supporting physical activity, and reducing exposure to air pollutants, noise, and excessive heat. So those are the basic values of open space. So just wanted you to have that in the back of your minds as you're debating this application. So thank you. As you think about it, I put this slide in. You can sort of think of that individual, walking past a space and wondering, what it should be. There's so much development going on in the city, and much of it is warranted. But if we have opportunities to set aside open space, that's clearly needed as well. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Rose, I think.
Hi. This is great. Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask if there's, and I don't at all, I'm not asking you to create more work, but I'm curious to know if there is anything that sort of looks at the funding that has been committed to the seed, to establishing the seed fund, and how what it's leveraged and what it's sort of, to see the projects that have come out of it, just as a way to kind of connect. These are the dollars that the CPC has allocated in a given year.
No, Rose, those are good questions and very valid. I'm sorry, I can't track it for you. I can't tell you, at this point how much has gone into or where it's gone. One of the other projects that we're presenting tonight is the Glen Street Community Garden, and that property, I believe, was purchased with CPC funds. And I can't recall now whether that was through the land acquisition fund or whether that was a direct purchase. But that's a good example of the type of opportunity that might present itself.
It was something that it needed a quick turnaround, and so having that pot of money there and able and accessible to you guys was important.
It allows the city or the CPC to commit to a project, in a shorter period of time. Or if you're trying to get a hold, if you've got, if a group is trying to sell a property and we can go to them, the city can go to them and say, okay, well, we have a source of funding, so that's assured. So it's sort of like, a bank pre-approval for your mortgage or a loan. You can say, yes, this funding is set aside.
Okay.
And so if I may, just to follow up on what you were talking about there, Aaron, what this would look like in real time, there is an acre of land that's available. You cited 6.2 million as the cost. The 250 is like a tiny little speck, right? A little tiny percentage of that. The rest would come from a bond maybe, or another grant, or just what would that look like?
Right, Laura, it's very much an unknown. I mean, I can't say you would have to, there's probably a number of things you can pursue. I would say it's very highly unlikely that you would ever have the opportunity to buy a whole acre of land. But maybe there's a couple hundred feet adjacent to, a city park that you might want to acquire, or something else. And so it depends upon that parcel. Perhaps there would be, something more significant that would come along. But I think if we having the tool to go after anything that would allow us to expand the open space would be helpful. This is very much at the CPC's discretion. Heather raised a question earlier about, can the CPC, fund more or less than the application? So that's entirely within the CPC's purview, but we felt that this amount was reasonable for the market that we're in today.
Okay, David, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. I have a question about what discretion does the CPC have if in spending this money after it's been put into the seed fund? Do you, Arn, would you come back to us to say, and here's what we want to spend the money on, or would the city then have kind of carte blanche to do what they want with it?
I think that in all cases, if I have Roberta or Laura, if you know differently, but I believe in all cases the funding would still have to be approved by City Council. So
but not
even
by
though the money,
but not by the CPC.
Not by the CPC. It would have to go to, I think that the request for the acquisition could come from anywhere. You could have, a group or an agency that says we should go after this piece of property, and then but there would be some level of support for that warrants its request going to City Council. But I think it is a good tool. It is a good tool for the CPC, obviously.
Yeah, no, and I like the idea of there being money set aside for being moved quickly on projects. I think this is actually kind of, maybe it'll come back up when we're talking about the Glen Park project, but just the question of how the decisions are made, of what the land will be used for. So for example, the decision of that being a community garden is supposed to be made part of the Glen Park.
Sure. And those things are often, with most of these projects, whether it's park, playground, community garden, these things are judged on a case-by-case basis. So it would be whatever the needs are of that particular space. Maybe there's a housing development and you want to have, more space next to it for, park or playground or, some sort of like shared community space. I don't know. It would depend upon the particular application or site.
And that sort of public space and public access to it, one of the things that concerns me with the community gardens is that they're not really accessible to all members of the public. They're accessible to the ones that have a garden plot.
Right. That's a whole conversation that people have different opinions on.
Heather, did I see your hand up?
Yeah. So I'm really in fond of the land acquisition fund, and I was glad to see a higher ask this year. And I think, just for the record, this is the one where last year we wanted to fund it for more than they had asked for, because they asked for very, very little, and we were told that we could not do that, or we were advised against funding anything more than they asked. So just for members who weren't here last year, to let you know that was the history of that.
I recall that's correct, and I think we were trying to be cautious at the time. We were aware that there was perhaps a lot of asks of the CPC, and so we wanted to have a number that we thought would get more acceptance. But in hindsight, we agree. It should have been a larger ask last year.
Thank you for that, Heather. Any other questions on this application? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Arn, for the presentation. Next, we have Glen Park Community Garden.
So you can see that I was
Are you able to see it?
Yes, thank you. Great, that's great. You can see that I was using the same boilerplate, so we have the wrong date here as well. It's not April 27th. My apologies. One of the points that
My
I want to make,
apologies, you did send me a correction. I didn't get that in file.
that was at the last minute, so it was just as I was reviewing it this afternoon that I saw it. So, definitely my error. One of the points that I want to make with this presentation is that in our initial application, our request had said 200,000, and the more accurate number is 210,000. So this application is for the Glen Park Community Garden expansion. It's a great community garden now. The city acquired the parcel of land adjacent to the community garden, and we're looking to expand that space. Next slide. There we go. So here is just the application, part of the application cover page showing that the number is 210,000. Can we go back to that for a second? I just wanted to make a point again that this is a revised cover page for our application. This is not the cover page that you received. So just noting that our request here is for 210, not 200. Yeah, thanks. Next slide.
My
Next slide.
apologies. It's
Oh,
not,
that's right.
yep, it's not responding. Let me try again. I'm sorry, can you, oh,
Can you go back to the slideshow? Well, can I go backwards?
yeah, it's, I'm sorry, it was just, oh,
Oh,
this
there,
is
it got stuck. All right, that's good.
there, okay.
That's the next one, perfect. So let's go back to the text background slide. There we go, just hold that. So some of you may know, and others, this may be new information, but just to reiterate what I said a second ago, the city acquired this residential property at 5 Palmer Avenue in 2017 through a CPA acquisition with the idea, so this house is on Palmer Avenue, which was essentially just a driveway to the house. So the acquisition was for the house and Palmer Avenue, which are adjacent to the Capuano School and field, and sort of squeezed between the existing community gardens and the basketball courts. With the funding, the city was able to purchase the land and then to demolish. Hopefully that's not going to be a problem. That is, Roberta, that's on your computer, right? In any case, the funding that we had was to purchase the property and then do the demolition. So we are now at the point where we've got the property and it's been demolished. So the proposed improvements, as we said in the bottom, the proposed improvements included abandoning Palmer Avenue, installing a new accessible parking and garden utility area, new accessible raised beds, seating area, and doubling the amount of existing open space or community garden space. Can we go to the next slide? Just as a geographic reference, if you took this off of Google, you can see in the bottom right corner where the community garden at Glen Park is located. You can see the Capuano School to the left, the Capuano sports field and the playground, which is at the opposite end of the field. At the bottom of the slide, you can see Franklin Street running across at a diagonal. At the main road at the top of the slide is Glen Street. Glen Street, as you follow it to the right, it intersects Pearl Street, and the East Somerville Community School is in that direction. In the opposite direction on Franklin Street it would come down to like the Cobble Hill Apartments and that area where the new public safety building is planned. So that's sort of like geographic reference. Let's get a close up on the next slide. Here's the property before the existing driveway and house were demolished. You can see the community garden plots in the bottom right corner with the house is there and the driveway with the field to the left and the basketball courts to the top. So this, when the Capuano was developed, the homeowner did not want to sell their property. And so that's why this house stayed in the middle of this larger public space. And so it was only when the matriarch of the family died a few years ago that the family came back to the city and said, if the city's interested, then they were interested. And so that was when the CPC got more involved and the city purchased a property. Then there was a discussion in the CPC at the time as to what that space should be. Should it be, public housing? Is there something? Is there another value that the CPC wanted to consider? And I think that open space was what everyone discussed. Next slide. Here's an updated picture of the same space. You can see here the house is demolished, the driveway is gone. This is what we have more or less now. So we'd like to, the application is to expand the community garden into the space. Next slide. So just want to talk, this slide is, again, it's from the application. It sort of talks about the benefits of community gardens, the idea of growing, having local food, and then the demand for community gardens in the city. My dog must be somebody coming to the door, so if they ignore the barking. This is the only community garden serving the East Somerville community. The garden does not satisfy the demand of the community or the area. The plots are oversubscribed. So acknowledging that, our Department of Public Space, Urban Forestry, PSUP, is designing the space in-house, and then we want to go out and hire a landscape architect to develop the construction drawing specifications. So that $10,000 request, which is a part of this application for the landscape architect, is to develop construction specifications. Next slide.
So Arne, you need to try to wrap this one up.
Sure, we can do this quickly. Here's a schematic design that we've developed. You can see we've provided ADA parking in the bottom of the driveway at the entrance. There are ADA garden spots. There's a little shade pavilion for people to use, sort of in the center. So we would run with a version of this. We go to a community meeting and get input, and then work with a landscape architect to develop the specs. Next slide. This is the budget, same budget that you've seen in the application. $210,000 is a total request. It covers the design and the construction costs. Next slide. That's it. That last slide basically said that PSUP has a lot of experience developing spaces in the city, and we do CPA funds, for White Sullivan Playground, Prospect Hill Park, Winter Hill Community Innovation School, and very recently the Healy School Community Playground, which we just opened last week, or we just had the official dedication for last week. Ribbon cutting. All right, that's it. Any questions?
Questions? Alan?
Yeah, I have a question. Did I understand correctly that you're looking at putting parking spaces on what's going to be open space?
One of the things that we always focus on is to provide good ADA access. And so the parking spaces at the end of the driveway are just to provide ADA access for people with those needs. So there's no.
Why not just put ADA parking, handicap parking on the street and restrict it on the street?
Alan, that's a good question.
That gives you more open space utilization.
Alan, that's a reasonable question. I think, so the drawing that I showed was a schematic design that was done in-house, and we'll go, was with the idea of truly trying to provide, ADA accessibility as easily as possible. But it can change, so we'll have a community meeting and we can talk through, and maybe, that's an opportunity that people will see. Others might feel differently. But that would be part of the community process and then part of the design. People say, well, actually, it's more valuable to have that as garden space.
Well, it just seemed to me that we've got the ability at the city to manage the parking appropriately for handicapped access. And we've got the ability to provide ramps when we're rebuilding this.
That's absolutely right.
It would seem a shame to use open space for parking when the streets are there as well.
The argument that I could hear is that, yes, you could dedicate parking spaces on the street with signage saying that it's, limited parking, or perhaps I guess if it's ADA parking on the street, it's unclear as to how often it would be used. The school is there, it's right there as well. And so there's a lot of competition for parking in that area, but it's clearly a consideration.
Other questions for Aaron on this one? Okay, Aaron, thanks very much. We have one more application presentation on Somerville Junction.
Are you able to see Somerville Junction now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
I'll try to move through it quickly. I know we're trying to stay on time. So we've been working on this park. This park has a long history. And we're trying to move it forward. So you have the CP, our application, but if you look at this slide at the bottom, this is the link to the web page on the city. So if you want to see, the public presentation that we had from the community meeting, or want to see more information on the park, it's available at that web page. Our request is for $100,000 for design and engineering funds. So we see the construction coming, and we have some funding. We're acquiring funding for that, but this request is just for the design. Next slide. Just as a geographic reference, here you can see the park in the dark area. This is alongside the rail corridor where the new community path and Greenland Extension are going. If you go to the left, you're headed towards Davis Square, Lexington Park. If you go to the right, across Central Street, there's Hoyt Sullivan Park right across the street, and you move on towards the high school, Ed Leathers Park, other pieces, and what I think of as sort of like our own sort of like emerald necklace and connection of open spaces. So here is Somerville Junction Park as we see it. Next slide. We don't have to go through all of this. This is the timeline of the park, sort of like runs through the past history and takes it up into the future. This was a rail junction, rail depot in the 30s. City abandoned that space. It became polluted. We got an EPA grant and park grants in around 2006, 7, and 8. New Pasta Park was created. We cleaned up the site and capped it. We had hoped to have it be a longer, more linear park, but we didn't have rights to all of the land. So we now do have rights to the whole space and can develop the entirety of the park as we see it. So we've been talking about this project for a little while, both in the community. There's been lots of, people in the community who have talked about it at city council. Some of the city councilors have been very vocal in their advocacy for it. So we had we put in our pre-application for design funding with CPC. We applied for a park grant. We were awarded the park grant, so we now know that we have at least $400,000 in construction funding available. The plan going forward is to start the design, winter, spring, get a landscape architect on board. The park funding comes available in July. So we want to get our ducks in a row and get a designer on board and get the plans underway. The park funding comes available in July and has to be spent by the end of the following fiscal year. July is the beginning of the next fiscal year, and that's how the park grant cycle runs. So that means we would have to have a park grant funds expended by next year. If there are other funds that are part of the project, they could continue to be spent after that. But we want to spend at least the $400,000, and there's a city match that goes with that by June of next year. So the idea is then that it would open, we have the public process nailed down, get the design confirmed. And again, if you go to the webpage, you can see some of the ideas that the city put forward. There's a recording of the community meeting there. So working with the community, we would design a new space and try to have it open by next summer. Not next summer, but a year, summer of 23. Next slide. This is when we were working on this park in 2008, when we were first developing it. This was a schematic design for the space. And so you can see the space that's at the left of this design is more or less what Somerville Junction is today. We were able to develop, you can see the circular lawn area and the plantings around it and a little bit to the right. That's what exists now. All of the space to the right that's labeled as dog run and parking was not developed. It's just remained as parking. That is now being used by, as the Green Line GLX staging area. So we want to so the GLX team is going to be moving out of this space, and we want to move into it. So next slide. When we designed in that previous slide, and if you look at previous meetings, this park was always designed to be this great space adjacent to the community path. So even in 2008, we envisioned the same thing. We said, okay, well, we know that at some point in the future, we want to have this community path that comes through this space. And at that point, it was perhaps more than a pipe dream, but still a long ways from reality. So that is now reality. The community path is going through this space as part of the Green Line extension. And so we want to create this new park, this new sort of like green jewel, if you will, along that necklace. And so when we had our community meeting, people talked about several things, but some of the main focal points were the idea of improving tree canopy, expanding tree canopy, having some sort of water feature, water play space, and then having an adult fitness area, and then additional community gardens. So those are some of the major ideas that are on the table. Again, this is a preliminary concept plan, so I can't say that what the final design will be or that those things will be in it, but those were some of the main ideas that were put forth by the community. So this is, again, just sort of, it's great to see the previous slide and this one in comparison, because it's nice to see that the ideas that we had in 2007 and 2008 when we were envisioning this are actually coming to fruition, and we're now able to make this happen. Next slide.
If you can try to wrap it up, Arn.
Sure. This is the budget. The park is going to be expensive. We know we've got $400,000 in park grant money. we're asking for CPA funds for $100,000 for design. And then we'll probably be coming back to CPC for an additional request for construction funding. If that is not practical, then we will obviously seek other funds as well, or tailor the size of the project accordingly. But I would expect you'll see an additional request, coming next year. And then we have city bond authorization for 187,000. Next slide. This is just the big picture stuff. Great community benefits. You can't, argue with this stuff. You've got a 0.60 acres, right now. You're going to add another 0.83 acres, and you're going to convert that from asphalt to green space, making this park, 1.43 acres in size, one of the largest parks in the city. It's going to be this phenomenal space on the Green Line. In the second paragraph, Green Line extension is coming through extending the community path. Going to go through the entire length of the park, and it won't be an isolated green space as it is now, but will be linked to the community path, be ADA compliant. It has wonderful connections in all directions. New path will expand tree canopy. New path will have in theory a water feature, community gardens, fitness spaces. And again, coming back to connections, if you go, if you look at the connections of the space to whether it's Hoyt Sullivan across the street, across Central Street, or other parks in the area, and the resources along the community path, it's obviously a win-win. Next slide. That's it. So this is what we have now, and you have to think about, imagine what it will be in the future. Any questions?
Questions for Aaron? Somerville Junction?
Yeah, I know that you want to wrap up, but it's a lot of money, and I'm trying to wrap my mind around why it's so much money for what's largely passive recreation, and not a, large for Somerville, but not that big a piece of land.
It is amazing how much things cost these days. So we did an analysis a few years ago, and I think that when you develop a park space, there are certain systems which are going to be included. And so whether it's a playground and hardscapes and has, those visible features that you register on, or passive green space that also has, systems in it, a lot of the same things are incorporated in terms of there's the construction, the grading, materials are brought in, electric connections, irrigation systems, and it does add up. It's a very realistic cost. I mean, that's an accurate estimate of what it would cost. We've seen the cost of parks, go from 20 years ago, a reasonable playground might cost $250,000. Those days are long gone.
You had mentioned that there was a city match required for the park grant.
Right.
Will that be met by subsequent CPA
No,
funding,
that
or
will
is
be
that
met.
separate? That additional?
Right. That is approved by City Council already. That will be bond money.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? I like the emerald necklace reference, or Somerville's own. I like the idea of it. Picture all those parks, right, lined up over there.
I think it's something that the city has been working towards. Our department, other departments have been working towards as well. Is just as you start to green, as you continue to green the city, these natural linkages appear, and whether it's a street corridor connection between spaces, or whether it's adjacency of parks, we're really starting to see these spaces gel. It's amazing to look at what's happening in the city these days, and in terms of the new spaces and the connections and increased accessibility.
But by the way,
Nice.
congratulations on getting the park grant.
Pardon
Oh,
me.
yeah.
I have to confess, I have not been working on this project. It is very much the work of Andrew Lowe, who used to sit on the CPC, and Louisa Oliveira. They clearly carry the burden on this project.
Well, kudos to everyone involved. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, Arn. And if none, then let's move on to the next agenda item, which is the Affordable Housing Trust report. Roberta, are you going to share that with us on your screen?
Yes, I'll share the screen and I'm going to advance Mike Filoni, who is here to talk about that.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. I hope members can hear me okay.
Yeah.
As Roberta mentioned, I'm Mike Filoni, and I serve as the housing director in the city's housing division within the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development. And we typically have our staff person to the Affordable Trust and works most closely with CPA staff for the city present. That staff member is out for a couple of weeks, so I'm glad for the chance to present on Paul Goldstein's behalf. Before I try to touch on a selected number of sort of highlights or takeaways from the report, I just want to do a time check since the top of the agenda I have says the meeting is going from 6:30 to 8, and I know we're at 8:45, so I'm just trying to gauge how fast to speed through this.
It's kind of you to ask. Yeah, we're obviously very over. I'd say, you know, I don't want you to super speed through it, but yeah, you know, keep it succinct if possible. How about?
We'll take the 10,000 foot view, and if anyone would like to get down lower than that, I'm glad to try to provide more detail. But this is a regular report presented twice a year that some members of the CPC will be familiar with, and there are basically 4 sections. It's a standard format, as I think you're aware, and this 6-month report is 5 pages. So the first section is really quite standard, just the introduction, noting what we're transmitting, and we can go right to funding availability if you'd like. And we try to put the funding that the Affordable Housing Trust has been fortunate to access with the CPC's support in the context of other sources of funding. And one significant takeaway that'll become a bit clearer as we continue on is that the percentage of CPA funding as a total of overall funding to the trust has been decreasing in recent years. That is not thankfully due to any decrease in funding from CPA. It is due to significant increases in other sources coming to the trust, namely linkage funds that accrue to the trust due to commercial development in the city that involves mitigation payments to the trust for impacts to affordable housing. So you'll see that at this point in time, that linkage and fractional payments is about 60%, almost 60% of the total. And CPA funds are a very significant portion, the next highest percentage at 35%. and I'm glad to continue on. If there are any questions at this point, please do feel free to jump in at any point. So as I said, if we continue on to funding history, and I would like to note that this is the first chance I've had to present with Roberta since she's joined OSPCD, and I found the sort of graphic presentation of some of this information really helpful. So I want to thank her for that. And you'll see how over time, since funding began to be allocated to the Affordable Housing Trust in 2014 and 15, as I noted, the percentage of CPA funding has shrunk relative to other sources and only relative to that. There is one anomaly if we scroll down a bit, or one curiosity I can explain, which is that while the first year of CPA funding going to the trust is listed as FY14, the funds actually were deposited for the first time, both for 2014 and 15 in FY 2015. So that is why you see such a huge percentage in that fiscal year coming from CPA sources. And I can go right on to the third page if that works for everyone. And a couple of points to note here that might be of interest are that as of FY20, you will see for the first time debt service, that there is a negative figure reflecting debt service. That is on a $6 million bond issuance that members who have been on for several years will remember, and that is the first year in which principal and interest payments were due, and just about all of those numbers, just about all of that $6 million has already been spent down in support of the city's 100 Homes initiative. So while that top graph is sort of related to the funding history, the next section takes a step back. It's a standard section that will be familiar to most, if not all, members in terms of the origins of the Affordable Housing Trust and how long it has been active. The first year was active in terms of programmatic work was 1991, so is actually at its 30-year anniversary at this time. And then there's just some definitional information that I won't spend time on unless there happen to be questions on it. The planning and context section is also to a large degree standard, and since there is turnover on the CPC, I would say appropriately so, but that walks through some of the work that goes into the work of the trust in terms of strategic planning efforts and how its funding decisions are made. And I would note in regards to one point made here, the Affordable Housing Trust is in the process of beginning work on a 5-year strategic plan, hopefully having a consultant selected towards the end of this year or early in 2022. And a related section that just gets into a bit more detail in terms of the priorities of the Affordable Housing Trust references or reflects that strategic planning work. So at this point, my informal sense as one member of the trust is that these continue to be quite relevant and appropriate criteria, but I am sure they'll be revisited and considered further as that strategic planning effort progresses. And then the last and perhaps most immediately interesting area of interest to the CPC is what did CPA monies yield for last fiscal year. And The work really did focus on the 100 Homes program that I'm glad to talk about in more detail, but I suspect most, if not all members are familiar with already. There were 9 units, a total of 10 units. There is, I'm realizing a discrepancy in some of the information that I'll work with staff when they're back in the office. Excuse me, I'm just noting that. But there were roughly 10 units acquired and a total of 56 units as part of that 100 Homes program that the trust has supported, with the vast majority of support coming from CPA sources. And then the last 2 paragraphs under recent highlights and the concluding sections of the report reference the fact that along with that new housing development and acquisition work, CPA sources also support programmatic work. And so the last 2 paragraphs note that in some of those activities in FY20 and FY21, with some of the longstanding programs that have only increased in terms of their importance and demand for them in the last year and a half, going on 2 years, are programs supporting activities such as rental assistance, tenancy stabilization, housing assistance for victims of domestic violence, and program administration in support of the 100 Homes efforts. So I hope that didn't take more than the few minutes I intended. And as I said, I'm either glad to just conclude and have you get on with the rest of your agenda, or try to respond to any questions members may have.
Mike, thank you. Thank you for that informative report and for keeping it relatively short. And I'm going to throw it open to the committee for any questions or clarifications, starting with Rose.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for that presentation. Nice to see you. And I know I'm not going to turn this into a big, long discussion, although I feel like there is a lot to talk about, and I'm sort of disappointed that we're out of time. And so one of the questions I guess to both to Mike and to the chair and my fellow committee members is would it be possible for us to give more time to this at a later meeting? Because I feel like this is there's a lot here that for us to talk about. What I would love to ask Mike and the Affordable Housing Trust is, are the funds, are you feeling like the funds are going out the door, and are there issues, like do applicants have issues with accessing the funds? Are there things that the committee can do to talk with you to sort of better have those funds flow as best they can? And maybe they are already flowing and there aren't any issues, which is great. There's a couple of things in the priority I would love to talk about the priorities. They all seem great, but sort of how to dovetail some of the restrictions and guidelines under the CPC program in a way that that best supports the anyways.
Thank you.
That's it.
I'm sure we would be glad to come back anytime. There may be perhaps a month, and perhaps there's a relatively light agenda, although I'm guessing that's not frequent. But we would be glad to do that. And just one additional point that your question makes me think of, Rose, is there's always room for improvement in terms of flow of funds. One component of our strategic planning effort will be a survey of recipients of funds done by that third-party consultant, so they can speak respond candidly. I believe it will be anonymously conducted. And I don't know offhand whether there are CPC members also who would be contacted as part of that. But in any event, that might be an appropriate or instructive point at which to return when we get some of that feedback during the course of that effort. So that's one thought, but whatever works for the committee, we'd be glad to accommodate.
Great.
Thank you for your flexibility there, Mike. I kind of agree with Rose that this feels a little compressed to go over after all the presentations. So maybe I will suggest that when Roberta and Heather and I prep when it's the upcoming meetings, we make sure this gets on the agenda. And Roberta would probably reach out to you, Mike, and figure that out in advance, of course.
That sounds great. Sounds great.
Yeah, thank you again. Other comments or questions? That's fine.
Thank you. And it was great to be able to learn a bit about some of the other important work you're doing. So I do want to be respectful of your time and let you get back to it. But thank you for making it this much time available tonight on a really full agenda.
And I just want to thank you for putting together a really beautiful report. You always do a great job, and it's very well done. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, and I'll share it with our staff who currently is out for a period of weeks. As I said, it has evolved and I think continued to improve. And I would say, you know, I think that continues to be the case, especially in terms of just trying to convey some of the information. And I like to think, yeah, we're doing that more effectively. That was really with Roberta's help in this iteration of the report. So look forward to continuing those efforts too. Okay. Then I will let you get back to the rest of the agenda and have a good night. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. We'll talk again soon.
Great. Bye-bye.
You all right. So next we have the coordinators report. I'm going to turn that over to you, Roberta.
Thank you. I will be as quick as I can. I do have a few points to go over. So I wanted to update the committee that we have submitted to the City Council for signing 2 preservation restrictions for historic preservation projects funded in prior rounds, including the Elizabeth Peabody House and Grace Baptist Church. Circulating them for signatures is a last step in the process before they're filed at the registry. And these will be the first preservation restrictions filed for the City of Somerville as part of the CPA conditions for CPA projects. So congratulations to the CPC for this small success. And there are 2 or 3 more in the pipeline close behind those. So we will soon have a series of preservation restrictions filed as a result of community preservation projects. Secondly, we've been continuing to work on public outreach, and I did include an updated calendar for public outreach in the folder. I'll just go ahead and talk about that now to be succinct instead of bringing it up in the next agenda item. Namely, Jahan and I are scheduled, weather permitting, I cross our fingers, on Sunday to the last big outdoor event of the season, which is Summer Streets, the Halloween festival. There are still a couple of farmers markets that will be taking place over the month of November. In Davis Square and in Union Square. So if anyone is interested in tabling at any of those farmers markets, let me know, and I would be happy to be your tabling partner as long as I'm available, which is very likely for Davis Square and very possible for Union Square. And then we could also think about in the future whether to table at Winter Farmers Market. It's actually good timing with respect to your annual review process. So that's a question perhaps for a later meeting. Next, I've been familiarizing myself with our procedures, assisting applicants and grant recipients through the process, and considering ways that we may be able to simplify the process or clarify things in the next round to make it more accessible and to try to head off some of the questions and concerns that have come up in this funding round. So that's something that we'll be working on again in the annual review process. And we've been working on submitting annual reporting to the state about projects that we've carried out over the last year and our funding picture. In case you aren't aware, both the Department of Revenue, I'm reading, I just realized a previous month's coordinator's report. So let me pull up another file. My apologies. I don't want to miss anything that I intended to talk about this round.
Do you know what day of the week the Union Square Market is? Is that Saturdays?
Union Square is Saturday.
Yeah. Okay.
And best laid plans, my computer is somewhat frozen. So I have I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to pull up the file that I created that has I thought that felt too familiar as I was reading it. And yeah, so you'll just have to go on without me, and I hope that there isn't anything extremely important that I needed to. I do recall that I wanted to talk about the committee, the changeover in committee membership, because we have several seats that are empty right now or will be empty in the near future. That includes the Conservation Commission seat, and which Christina just left, and we're awaiting a new Conservation Committee member to be reassigned. We have with us this evening David Turin from the Conservation Commission. Maybe you could give us an update on filling that seat.
Yeah, we discussed it at our meeting last night, and since I had offered to sit in tonight, we just kind of agreed we would talk about it at our next meeting, and figure out who we're going to have I guess complete the rest of Christina's term. It may well be me, which is so, and I don't know if anyone. Yeah.
So we are also anticipating that a new staff member from the Public Space and Urban Forestry Division will be starting next month and should also be joining us next month. So for tonight, we have Arn still standing in that role. And looking ahead, it's my understanding, I think that Tatiana will not be serving a second term after her current term expires at the end of this year. Is that correct, Tatiana?
Sorry, yeah, I did get your email. I've been out of service areas all day. It's increasingly looking like I might be able to serve at least a substantial portion of the term. So I did want to talk with you about that. Sorry, I know this is not, I've just worked for almost 11 hours today. Is it possible that this could be discussed at a later point? I don't think I'm articulate enough to do anything right now. Sorry.
That's fine. Yeah, you can get back to me later about it, but I just wanted to
Thanks, yeah.
to look at. And then the next is Eleanor. Her term is also expiring at the end of this year, and so I will be reaching out to the Housing Authority to see about finding a replacement for her seat. And I am.
Just on that point, so the next meeting will be making recommendations on the awards of the different grants. And so conservation, if you don't have a person assigned, they won't be a voting member at that point, and neither will, and Arn, you're not a voting member either. And so it just sort of behooves you to find someone from your.
So is the process that we simply notify you of who's taking Christine's place, or is there, is it more?
You'll need to notify the mayor's office.
Okay. Because I realize, I'm also realizing now your next meeting, I believe, is probably before our next meeting. So we'll have to figure, because we usually meet the 4th Tuesday. And it looks like you have a meeting the 17th, which can't be the 4th Tuesday, the 4th of any month.
I think because it's Thanksgiving, I think our next meeting is not on our normal pattern. I'm looking at the calendar.
Right, because I know normally Christina's, was always reporting that a meeting was like the following night after our meetings.
Right.
So I kind of assumed the cycle would repeat. And maybe we're doing our meeting. Yeah, I don't know what we're going to do about it being Thanksgiving week. I don't think we were going to reschedule because ours is Tuesday, not Wednesday.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it looks like we are meeting on the 17th of November.
Okay.
But so do they need to be sworn in as well, or since they're representing a commission or a department, they just notify the mayor's office?
Are you asking? I hope you're not asking me.
Asking you, I'm asking Roberta.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So maybe Roberta, we can talk about what the process would be and how much time we need to, because we can always figure out, obviously we'll have to work on it in between the meetings, which of course raises its own complexities regarding open meetings and so forth. But we'll see what we can do.
Okay. All right, so we'll talk offline. I was able finally to pull up my correct notes for tonight. Really important thing, I wanted to comment on the Adams Magoon application because it was listed in some documents as a forthcoming application for this round. And really at the last minute, we were not able to pull it together to include in this funding round. So I was able to provide the applicant with assistance through our on-call preservation consultant, as well as offering examples of applications for comparable CPA projects from Somerville or other communities so that they could have a stronger idea of who they might be able to reach out to for appropriate contractors and consultants for this work. And so that they could develop a more detailed scope and obtain cost estimates. In the end, the applicant simply ran out of time. When I began to provide the level of assistance that she needed, there wasn't enough time to be able to pull the information that she needed together before the presentations. And that's so we just ran out of time. So certainly with the level of confidence and that would be needed for this project to be ready. So with the resources I provided her, she should be in a better position to perhaps be able to prepare a viable application for next year. So that's the status of the Adams Magoon application. And I wanted to remind everyone that we are due for officer elections in December. So please consider whether you would be interested in having an officer position on the CPC, either the chair or vice chair, and bring that to the December meeting. Is there anything else that I should mention about the officer positions, Arn?
No, with regards to the officer position, but I wanted to get back to, excuse me, just appointment to committees. process, as I understand it, is you make your recommendation to the mayor's office. The mayor's office then has to get that recommendation approved by city council. So if you're trying to get a voting, board in place, there's a couple of steps that have to go through. And one of the challenges that you'll have is trying to get something on the city council agenda as the end of the fiscal year or the end of the calendar year is approaching. So that if you're trying to accomplish something or get a vote on something, there may be a couple of hurdles.
For the public members, it has to go through city council, but for the statutory members, it does not have to go through city council.
Oh, okay, that's great. Great.
One other comment about our news item regarding CPC appointments and membership is that last week the city council voted to designate the community preservation committee members as special municipal employees. This means that there's a slightly more relaxed rules with respect to conflict of interest. So if you have, if you'd like to learn more about what that means, contact me and I will share with you information about what it means to be a special municipal employee. And I am looking again through my notes regarding outreach. I think I covered everything. I'm working still on being able to set up a Facebook page. I need to coordinate with the city's media staff. And then my next goal will be after next month to begin working on stakeholder outreach. And other business, we have an upcoming ribbon cutting for the library. I've sent everyone an announcement about that. I don't happen to recall offhand what the date of that meeting is, and I didn't include that in my notes. So
It's the 5th of November at 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Pleasure.
So that's everything on my end.
Did you want to ask for feedback on the rubric, for proposals?
Well, I want to, so yeah, I mean, just a reminder again that I'm willing to adjust the rubric if it's helpful to you. I did have some notes that Christina had sent me, which I incorporated into the version that you see now. And otherwise, I have not received any comments from any other committee members, or my apologies if I have and I have overlooked them. So I included the rubric this evening in case it would be helpful for you to use as you reviewed the presentations. But
I didn't see the rubric. Where would I find that? Was that in that?
it is. It's
Was
in
that
the
in all
meeting
the
packet.
other documents? Okay.
Yes.
I think I just
It's
didn't.
not in a subfolder.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess we're going to use what's there because it's been updated, and it's a tool, I think, for all of us to sort of keep in our back pockets as we think about the applications, and we'll be discussing and voting on them next month. I think it's going to be super helpful myself. Yeah, Rose.
Yeah, I agree. I think the matrix, I think it's awesome. It's a really great tool. And the only other thing, and I apologize if you already have done this, but it would be really helpful in sort of thinking about how the funds that are there to be allocated in the different categories. Do we have sort of a summary of what it is what the total is?
I will have that and include that in your next meeting packet. I recall that in the previous meeting packet, which you can still access if you go back to the email that has that link, in the previous meeting packet, there was a document that summarized all of the applications that had been received on one page, and on a second page, there was a table showing a rough approximation of the funds that are available. Now, that was based on the amount that was appropriated last year, and so that's not, I have to go back to the books now and find a more precise number, because the amount that's actually received is always a little bit different from what was anticipated at the time that the funds are appropriated to each reserve. So I will give you a more up to the minute report at the next meeting before you make your decision.
Okay. And will that also include balances from previous, if there, I don't know if there are uncommitted funds, but would that be included? Yes. Okay, great.
So I may not provide all of that detail in the report that I give you next month, but I will be sure to subtract out anything that has already been committed and not spent yet from the amount that I report is available.
Great, thank you.
And they usually also include like the bond payments on the affordable housing and on the open space that are out, so.
All right. So the community engagement you already went over. Is there any other business items that we didn't discuss as part of your report? Okay. As touched on earlier, the next meeting is not our usual time because of Thanksgiving. Instead, it's going to be held on Wednesday, November 17th at 6:30. It's going to be, we're still virtual for the time being, so Roberta will send the meeting packet and the link, and we already know that pretty much the bulk of the meeting is going to be discussing the proposals and voting on the proposals. That's going to take up a fair chunk of time, I'm guessing, if not all of it. All right. If there's no other business, I'm going to ask somebody to make a motion to adjourn. Okay, Alan, you're muted, but I see you raising your hand. Okay.
I'm muted, but yeah.
Okay. Can somebody second it?
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor? Do I have to do a formal vote for this one?
Aye.
Show of hands. Can we do it? Show of hands. It's so late. All right, it's 9:21 on October 27th. I'm going to call it officially adjourned just by show of hands. I hope that's okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Yeah,
Good night, all.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm.